Hey everybody, today I'm here with Otto Hilska. He is the CEO and founder of Swarmia. And we have been having a lot of chats between the two of us about just the impact of AI on this whole industry. And so we thought it'd be fun to record some of that. So Otto, thank you for sitting down with me and getting your fancy mic out.
Thanks, Rebecca.
So AI is here. That's very clear. It's having a transformational impact on our industry, on the software development industry, and on all industries in many ways. We could fight about whether AI is more impactful than the internet or more impactful than the PC, but it's up there in terms of how it's changing what we're doing. So, although you've been thinking a lot about this and have been staying really abreast of what's going on. What are you seeing in the industry as far as what people are doing with AI?
Yeah, it's interesting because companies are at so different stages with this, and also individuals, because there's definitely a bias that many senior developers seem to have around these AI tools, kind of focusing on the flaws and where it's not perfect and so on. And then there's people who are adopting these maybe sooner than kind of what the tools are able to support at the moment. But they're trying different things, figuring out better ways to prompt these tools and moving forward really quickly. And I think that's something that everyone needs to understand, is that these tools are changing so quickly that whatever was the situation a couple of months ago when you tried something and it didn't work, you should probably try it again, because chances are that someone else has faced the same issues and someone has been working on it. And I think that's the most exciting part about this, is that the momentum is very, you can feel that. And you can see that with all of the tools, that they're just getting better every single week.
I see a lot of conversations that are focused on AI's impact on keys, hands on keyboard. Like, can you move your hands faster? Basically, with AI. But we've talked about how AI is way more than that. I know I've done some vibe coding, but I've also used AI to do project planning and presentation, ideation, and all kinds of things. So, you've said it's more than Copilot, it's more than Cursor. Do you have any specific stories of people who are using AI in non-coding ways that are interesting in our industry?
Yeah, I think that's important to remember, and especially when people are trying to evaluate how well these things are working, they're focusing on something like Copilot and getting pretty tactical about kind of how well does the autocomplete work, which was kind of the original feature in this, which makes perfect sense, but also it's not something that I myself am even using much at the moment, because I find a lot more value in the kind of next generation features that are more kind of allowing more independence for the agent, letting it run commands, letting it access source code when it needs to. And so with all of these tools, they pretty much announce some kind of an agentic mode. And also then you have tools like Claude Code, where it's all about just prompting what you want to achieve, and the tool takes the necessary steps to understand what needs to happen next. So it will go and read different files from your system, etc. And to be successful with these tools, I think you have to really treat them as a platform that you're building for your developers. So, for example, one thing that we've been doing is focusing a lot more on documentation. And so now we have an example database model, kind of well documented, and so basically written for the AI, so that it's easier for it to figure out what kind of models do we want to write and what options do we have for this, so that we're not just randomly picking another file from the directory and trying to build something around that. So I think that's been working pretty well for us.
I do think there's so much about the when of this. We read about YC companies, they aren't even hiring engineers. They're just vibe coding their way to unicorn status or something. And that, I like I said, vibe coded myself a little website last weekend. I did it with a technology that I knew. I wasn't just like, hey, Claude, make me a website, but I said, make me a website using this stack that'll be hosted here, this. And so I felt like I was bringing some knowledge, but maybe I didn't need to. I don't know. But I felt like I was bringing some knowledge. And I also had, when Claude screwed up, I also had some intuition about what might be going wrong. It definitely demotivated me to read docs. Just bang at it until I got so frustrated I had to look something up or read some code myself.
Yeah. Especially the new Claude model, though, it's so eager to generate code. I had this example where I started a new repository and asked Claude Code to initialize it for me. And it took the name of the repository and figured out, okay, this is probably what you want to do with it. And so it went on to actually implement what I was supposed to be building. So, I think you need to be on the driver's seat with these things. And I think that's one of the challenges, because all the vibe coding tools, they make it seem like you can just kind of point it to an end result and like, I want this. But ultimately, as software engineers, our job was always to kind of come up with the abstractions that support the real world problem domain, making something really complex a little bit more accessible so that we can keep building features on top of that. And if you don't have that mindset, and if you just let these tools pick a new graphing library for you every time you kind of start a new or need a new graph, then you are going to end up with a huge mess. And so you need to have some kind of an idea of what am I building, and also how am I going to be structuring it. And again, I think it goes back to documentation. If you can write down always, okay, I made these choices, and maybe you made those choices together with these tools. Right. They are actually pretty good at recommending you libraries for a specific task. Right. But also, if they don't have the context for the next feature that you're building, then you're going to end up again with something that's pretty difficult to maintain.
Yeah. I can imagine, and whether the investment is worth it right now, I don't know, but I can imagine building, context or like business, not business logic, but business areas for specific LLMs that do know about, this is a customer and a customer has orders and the orders contain products and whatever, and they can understand all that. I read an article the other day, blog post, something the other day, just kind of ideating on how non-engineers are trying to use these tools and trying to not do an end run around engineers, but just like, why use an engineer's time if you can do it yourself? And that is fascinating and terrifying to me. I know lots of great product managers and even UX folks who can write perfectly good code too. But this article was kind of imagining a world where it was all done in you would have the website up in front of you and you would just sort of say what you wanted to change about it, what you wanted to try differently, and it would be more of a UI experience than a clickety-clack experience.
Yeah. I also saw a thread on one of the social media sites where someone was kind of very proud of the site that they vibe coded. Right. As soon as it started gaining some momentum, everyone, of course, went in and hacked that site. And so that led to an interesting conversation. And I have some friends who are like doctors or like some other professionals in another field who are now very excited about the ability to do something. And then, like, if you have the right kind of environment for it, then like you have the proper cloud set up for these and you're just incrementally producing some features, I think that's going to work really well. Mm-hmm. But someone needs to make sure that there's a security architecture of sorts so that you don't have a database that's open for the internet and so on. So again, you need some kind of a plan or an architecture for how you're going to approach it. But after that, I'm sure these enable a lot of folks to contribute. And indeed, it can be product managers. And we saw this in our own hackathon a few weeks ago, like our product managers and designers building their own features from start to finish. So it's definitely working.
It's happening. It's happening. I do want, and again, if we're like, I wonder if especially code related agents will get smarter about this and realize that, like, no, I'm not going to set you up with a giant security hole in your database. And no, I'm not going to spend $10,000 on AWS in a day, kind of thing. It seems like if you know that those are the things to defend against, but like you said, your doctor user isn't necessarily going to know that's a thing to defend against. Yeah. What are you seeing as far as how this is impacting? It's so hard for me to tease these two things apart because AI kind of showed up just as a lot of layoffs. Well, shortly after a lot of layoffs were happening in the software engineering industry, and I think there's a like fervent hope among boards that they never have to hire those people back. Although on the other hand, I talked to a CTO at one of our customers, and she said, absolutely not. Like, we're actively hiring junior engineers because that's how you make senior engineers. What do you think this does to the hiring landscape and even the education landscape for software engineers? I would not want to be a new grad, even if I was coming out of MIT right now. I might not want to be a new grad.
Yeah, it's tricky. And of course, there's a lot of companies who want to make sure that they produce senior engineers by hiring those junior engineers. And for me personally, I've hired a bunch of people straight from school, even like first year students. And for me, that's been the way to hire some of the best talent before anyone else finds them. And so I've been really happy with doing this. Of course, interest rates, for example, have an effect on how quickly our companies expected to grow in the first place. And now in this world, when you're not supposed to be tripling your headcount every year anymore, it just also means that, well, we get to be a bit more picky and we don't have to be doing all of that long-term work that was taking the whole industry forward. So it's definitely changing the things, and it's changing the numbers of like, what is that seniority pyramid or like whatever structure, because a lot of companies used to operate with the model of having a handful of very senior people, then kind of decent amount of senior developers, and then a lot of juniors that can be supported by this structure. And now if you're not having to grow quite as fast and you have all these AI tools, I think that's a combination that definitely affects the number of developers that need to be hired in the first place. And we are an example of this phenomena in a way that we have mostly very senior engineers in the team. And it's a choice.
That was a conscious choice, though, to staff it that way.
Yeah, exactly. We felt that we can do it, and we always wanted to build a relatively small team, but everyone's saying that this is the kind of best team they work with because like everyone is really great at whatever they're doing. And so it is working for us, but I also feel bad for not really contributing as much on kind of the new grads,
the junior side,
entering the industry. So yeah, it does change the math around this hiring for sure. At the same time, we definitely had a conversation just recently about, I think now more than ever, we need to hire the new grads who have been kind of using these AI tools all this time, probably for a few years, very actively, and like they can bring some kind of new thinking to the team as well.
How do those what do those people need to, what shape do they need to be? It used to be you could come out and you could like leak code your way through an interview, and there wasn't a whole lot more guardrails than that, especially for those places, like you said, that were hiring like juniors in quantity. And there was kind of a like where I lost the last place I was where we were hiring juniors in quantity, there was an up or out expectation that you would either be promoted quickly or maybe that wasn't the job for you. But what do you, if you were hiring a junior, I'm thinking about this too. Like if I was hiring a junior software engineer, Copilot's a junior software engineer in the coding sense. So what are your expectations going to be of a like first, new grad or like first time software engineer, and how are those different from what you've kind of looked for in the past?
Yeah, the AI tools make this economically difficult for the companies because the definition of a senior engineer for a long time has been that it's someone who can independently manage a project. Like you can be given an area that we want to launch a new product in this area, and you're going to be leading the effort, making sure that it's impactful for the business. You're going to be collaborating with product and customers and the rest of the team on building that. And then the kind of definition for junior engineers has been that you need help from someone else to kind of split the work for you. And you're able to kind of complete these tasks when you're kind of getting them from someone else, basically. And obviously, that sounds a lot like these AI tools. So if your job is to copy paste Jira tickets to a Claude code prompt, then to me that suggests that job is not going to be around really for a while. So I think for people to be successful in this, I think ultimately many junior engineers are able to operate at the level of a good senior engineer if they are doing this really well. And what I'm worried about the most is people who just copy paste stuff without understanding it. Right. And like, that's the critical thing you need to be successful here. Like you need to be learning something all the time from every single prompt you write and every response and every feature that you implement. So it should lead to learning, because otherwise you are not, like, you are just the copy paste engine.
On the other hand, I've copy pasted my share of code from Stack Overflow, and probably you have too. Maybe in your younger days, definitely in my younger days. But yeah, I agree that and I think it's going to be really interesting how the education system responds to this, as far as like actually preparing people to be more than copy pasters, because like you said, that we don't need that. And what I often see new grads coming out with is like limited knowledge about product and business. And I think that those kinds of things are going to become a lot more important. Because like you and I said, talking to Claude's a lot like talking to a junior engineer. And I felt that very hard when I was working on a project. This kind of brings us to like, there's that broad impact on employment that I think is going to be really interesting to see. And like, do we have kind of a donut hole where we didn't create enough senior software engineers, and how we will respond to that? But I know one of the things our customers and our prospects are really asking about is, how do they measure it? Perhaps so that they can start to have some intelligent thinking around this future. And that's been really, really, we've seen that be a really insistent demand from many people, many customers. They want to know, what am I getting? Like, I guess, what am I getting for this spend? Some leaders want to know, why isn't everybody using AI? I want to make everybody use AI for everything. If pull request didn't have AI involved, then it's bad pull request. Like I know a company where that's happening right now. But yeah, so there does seem to be a lot of pressure to use these tools and then to measure how using them is turning out. You and I have talked a lot about this. You wrote a blog post about it. How do you feel about this, measuring the impact of AI tools?
Yeah, I think everyone should start by asking, why are they doing this? And it's interesting because the responses are quite varied once again. So of course there's an element of, is this a good investment to get us a Copilot license or Cursor license? But also the reality is that costs you $20 per developer per month. Okay. And knowing how productive that is going to cost you more than that. So sometimes you just have to accept that like you can't fully optimize everything, and like optimizing for the cost aspect is probably not a super relevant use case. But then there's plenty of good use cases for this and reasons for measuring. And of course, just kind of where you started from, this is one of the bigger shifts in the industry. And given that it's such a shift, wouldn't it be nice to understand it well? I think to be able to do your job as a VP of engineering or CTO really well, I think you need to understand what's going on with these tools. And of course, numbers and different ways to kind of bring those anecdotes into the discussion, they are a way to start learning that. So that's one.
I find this interesting. I mean, of course, leaders are going to want this and they're going to want that general understanding. I also, and maybe this is just evidence of how AI is transformative and, interactive development environments weren't, but interactive development environments were a pretty big deal when, like, to go from not having that to having that is a pretty big deal. And I wasn't around for like the emergence of IDEs. I wasn't around for the emergence of like full-fledged IDEs like IntelliJ, but did people ask the same questions about those? Because it seems like, again, that's such an obvious purchase for relative to the value that you get out of it. What do you think? What's different about AI? Is it just that it is more transformative?
Yeah, and many of those IDEs cost more than these AI tools. So indeed, I think that's a fair question to ask. But I think it also shows that the direction of kind of where is this coming from, that's a bit different. Like IDEs are very much an ergonomic factor for developers, and it often starts from them, and it's really up to them to figure out. And as you were suggesting, a lot of companies are getting so much pressure from the board level, and that translates to pressure from the leadership, and the developers are really feeling that pressure to be using these tools. So I think that just changes the dynamic. But it is a real question leaders should be asking themselves, well, I mean, should that change the dynamic as much? Or can we still kind of trust the developers to use these for the right uses? Of course, this is also an area where, as we discussed, there's some heavy bias. Some people are just saying that, well, AI is just like a statistical machine that predicts the next token, so it's not really doing my job or anything else. But turns out it's doing a good job, and it can be really useful for a lot of things. So, and especially if you start from something like a prototyping project, the AI is going to do an amazing job, save a lot of time for you. If you have a migration project, that's another example where maybe that wouldn't even get prioritized if we didn't have these AI tools. And now you can kind of just convert files from one framework to another.
While you go eat lunch.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And for me personally, the AGI test I've had for these tools is, can I convert our website from Gatsby to Astro to a different Node.js framework? And it's almost getting it done. I still get a couple of styling issues, so I haven't submitted a PR for this, but it's getting pretty close.
Interesting. So what should people be measuring? We're not going to measure. You're saying we're not trying to measure like a straight up ROI, like $25 got me $100, although it probably did. But what should people be measuring, and what's challenging about that?
I think the fundamental kind of issue here is that most organizations are pretty new to measuring anything. And if this is the first time you start measuring something, you don't have any kind of a baseline, and you don't have any kind of a routine or kind of even the capability to do that. So it's a little bit unrealistic to just jump straight to the conclusion that, okay, I'm going to have a very accurate measure of how these tools are working. So, and ultimately, an organization that's supported by Gen AI tools, that organization's effectiveness is consisting of the same factors that any other software organization's effectiveness consists of. And we already know that, like, there's always a bottleneck. It shifts to different places, but also it shifts for different reasons. And this is not the first time we get productivity improvements around building software. Like I was an early adopter of Ruby on Rails, which was pretty transformative at the time when everyone else was like configuring Java beans and trying to get kind of that thing running. And suddenly a single developer can build something in a weekend that used to take like a month from a team. So like we've seen these kind of improvements several times in the history of software development. And that's kind of the thing, that tools are just getting better and better. And especially with these AI tools, I think it's all about the second order effects. There is no question that generating code is faster by using AI tools. Like that is a fact, and you can just kind of take that as granted. But then what happens next is, well, someone's got to review that code. And if we have a lot of people flooding the pull requests with changes that they didn't even read, and then they expect someone else to read this 2,000-line pull request, and the team is not collaborating on this stuff at all because everyone's working on their own project and they're not really interested in any of the things that others are building. Like, how do you start building that mental map of the code base and how things work? Because you need to build that in order to prompt these tools effectively.
Well, this really makes me think. One of the things one of my old bosses would say is that like some of the best productivity improvements are the ones that like change how you work. They aren't like, oh, this thing took 5 minutes and now it takes 4 minutes and 30 seconds. This thing used to take 5 minutes and now it takes 5 seconds. And then developers start to actually change their behavior. They're more willing to make small changes, etc. I don't think AI has that same AI kind of like is the slippery slope towards large changes unless you have something in place. I think that's still a place where engineers still have value, is thinking about how do we break this down so that these changes, the individual changes, are minimally risky without slowing down the velocity. And that could be testing. That could be bring agents in to review the code too. What could go wrong? But I do think, I think to me, the more interesting thing, like, yes, use AI and probably your cycle time goes down until you find your next bottleneck, right? And maybe you can point AI at that bottleneck, maybe you can't. I think if I were our customers, I would want to be knowing, and I want to know this here too, how do we use AI in our business, and what are other people doing to use AI in their business, and how is that working out for them? Not AI like, oh, we built Claude, but AI like, oh, we're Swarmia and we're going to add some AI stuff to our toolkit. I know we just went through that at the hackathon as well. And I think part of what made that so successful was that the work went in up front to make it possible for people to be effective with a new tool and a familiar code base. And I can't, if that work hadn't been done ahead of the hackathon, I think you would have seen very different outcomes. And we ended up seeing a lot of pretty shippable stuff at the hackathon. I don't know. I think that enablement piece is really important. Not just here's Claude, good luck, but here's Claude, and like here's how we're going to like make API calls in our code base, or make API calls in our code base.
Yeah, the enablement piece is so important and so overlooked. People are expecting developers to pick up these tools when they're basically without any configuration, and then everyone tries them, or maybe half of the people try them, and then they realize it's not very good, it's not working in our code base, and then they give up for at least a few months. Mm-hmm. And indeed, we talked about documentation before. That can be one way you can do it. For us, we kind of built, for example, the OpenAI client in the code base so that it takes into account things like we have customers who've told us that they don't want AI features. So we built a client that kind of handles that gracefully. And when we have these AI features in the product, we have a way of turning them off, and so on. And that kind of things really make it a lot smoother for developers. And with any of these tools, like you need to consider like how do you actually get adoption. And I'm kind of against forcing people to, for example, adopting these tools, like mandating that everyone needs to use them for every pull request. But then when everyone's tried it a little bit, or when everyone's implemented something like in one of the code bases with this, then you've kind of unblocked yourself and you know how it's actually done. And next time you're building another regular feature, you might be thinking that, oh, it would be really simple for us to add this one small change here that would make this whole feature so much smarter. And so you kind of need to get to that place where the engineers are going to be able to come up with these product ideas on their own as they are working on something that's ultimately valuable for the business.
Right. Which goes back to engineers are going to have to be connected more, perhaps, to what's valuable to the business. Which I think junior engineers have been, engineers in general have been shielded from in some cases. But certainly junior engineers haven't necessarily been told to even consider that because they weren't grown as product engineers, they were grown as software engineers.
Yeah, and there's plenty of engineers who really enjoy writing code, and maybe they don't like all this other stuff of coordinating with others and talking to customers and so on. And turns out now the writing code part is being taken away, and what's left is a lot of this other stuff and coordination.
What do you, it's kind of implied in everything that we've been talking about, but you start landing 2,000 line pull requests from a junior engineer without anybody looking at them too closely, and bad things happen. What's your kind of hot take on when do we start to see bad things happen where people start to be like, oh, this was a bad idea, actually?
Yeah, I think it's a similar dynamic to software in general. So you know the code that you wrote, and you're likely going to be productive in the code base that you wrote. And as soon as you bring someone else, they're going to expose all the flaws in your thinking and everything that you didn't make obvious for someone else. And a lot of startups are experiencing this. They have these legendary early developers who are so productive. And that's because they worked on their own stuff. They didn't have to care about scale. They didn't have to care about security. They didn't have to care about collaborating with other teams. And now suddenly business takes off. You start hiring a bunch of people, and then everyone comes in. They kind of suggest, let's start rewriting this in Rust because like this is a mess. And like building that knowledge about kind of the code base that you're building, that's such a critical part. And that breaks when people leave the team or leave the company, or when you start onboarding new team members. And the worst case is you're onboarding a lot of new team members when none of the original authors are around. And like, if there's ever a anti-developer productivity hack, that's it. Because like, no matter how you kind of try, you're going to spend most of your times just researching like what is going on here, like how do I make a change without breaking everything else. And so that's kind of how companies end up in a very difficult place where nothing gets shipped anymore. And with AI, you can get to that place very quickly. You can generate a lot of code, move on to the next thing, and someone else inherits this code base, and that's exactly what you have.
Also, that this isn't an AI is just making this problem happen faster, right? Because I worked at a job where in the early days, there was one code base and a small group of fairly senior people worked on it. Same thing. And as the product scope increased, you started to have new teams, but they wanted to contribute stuff to the original flagship code base. And that team that owned the flagship code base was just collapsing under the weight of all of the code review that had to happen, because the enablement bit was never done to make it possible for people to contribute to that central code base. And so there were no tests. It was all manually tested, etc. Anyway, it seems like AI just kind of accelerates that, but it's not necessary for that to happen. That's a thing that can happen with growth, just period. The person who wrote that code is now the vice president of engineering and probably not able to help you troubleshoot right now. So I think that can happen even without AI. AI just accelerates it.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what happens by default. So you have to actively do something and follow the best practices to avoid that situation. Still, the odds are against you because any type of growing the team, keeping to increase complexity, those are all factors that just make it more and more difficult to maintain the code base. But I think what we're like, as we discussed, AI is an amplifier. And like, if you're not doing a good job, then you can definitely accelerate your path to something that's really difficult to maintain. And all the good practices that we have in software engineering, they are more important than ever. And so I think that's another thing that I've seen a lot of universities, for example, shift their focus a lot to AI and machine learning, kind of moving away from software engineering. And I think that's a pretty big mistake because, and on the other hand, I don't know if schools can really teach you software engineering, but still all these architectural patterns, like how do you find the smallest increments, like all of these things are incredibly important in this era as well.
Yeah. That also leads me to ask, are there new best, has anything changed about the best practices? We talk about small changes, limit work in progress, finish what you start, all the, like, those all seem still pretty applicable. Yeah.
Yeah. And like automated testing, CI/CD,
CSD,
like all of that makes a ton of sense. Maybe the only change for me personally has been kind of the importance of documentation, because I've been usually kind of, my thought or process has been that if you're not able to maintain good documentation, then oftentimes it's better to kind of skip that altogether and try to make sure that like the code base kind of documents itself. Mm-hmm. You have a couple of entry points for documentation, like here's kind of the README for each repository and so on, but you don't go very deep to kind of documenting the concepts otherwise. And with these tools, they are able to read that same English language document that your developers can read, and it can improve the results quite significantly. So I think a lot of companies should invest more in that as part of their tooling enablement.
I can imagine that for some code bases that could be more difficult than for others. The start here to make a change. That code base that I was talking about that had everybody contributing to it, it was a code archaeology job to go find where anything was happening. Yeah,
exactly. And in that kind of an environment, it's difficult to know what is the current best practice, because people are looking around trying to see, well, how has someone else done this? And then you see that it's been done in 6 different ways. Right. So which one do you pick? So if there is a best practice and if there's some intentionality behind these decisions, then it is worth writing those down so that the models can pick the right.
I think that's a really important point, that these models can read English. They can read words too. That seems really important.
Yeah. And I've used that a lot for even kind of project documents. So if I start working on a bigger feature, I'm going to ask the agent to kind of keep a record in this file that's going to be about this project, like with the context and with what changes we're making and like where are we in this project. So we're almost like managing a to-do list there, because that can really help you focus. And like that's ultimately what a lot of people should be doing themselves. And of course, many of us have that in issue trackers, but like managing a complex project like that is pretty important. And now if you're doing it with a document like that or working doc, at least I've gotten some success from that.
Do you think AI, that we can reach a point where AI can actually say, oh, don't do that, that's going to cost you $10,000 on the cloud?
Yeah, I would expect so. And I think one of the GitHub Copilot versions already introduced this kind of these multiple agents that you're working with. So you have a planning tab where you work on what is this feature going to look like, and then you work on kind of the implementation and so on. And similarly, I think there can be some kind of an infrastructure platform agent as part of these decisions, kind of watching, are you making the right kind of calls? I think these can be really powerful for even things like watching out database migrations, so that we're not taking down the production database every time we make some kind of bigger change. Right now, we have a Notion page where we have kind of how to write Postgres migrations that don't take down the database.
Right.
And like everyone's reading that. And I think we even have a comment in the migration template kind of pointing you to that page, so that you're going to be able to verify that you're not breaking those rules.
Right.
And of course, I think this is a perfect job for an AI to kind of verify that you're not making doing something that you shouldn't.
Does it need to be AI?
I mean, some of this stuff is actually like it's really a linter of some sort. I mean, we write a lot of linting rules ourselves just to kind of ensure that we kind of build the code base according to the rules that we've agreed to. So like we can say that you cannot import database models directly from this directory and so on. So you can build limitations like that. But of course, with AI, you can go further and maybe even take in your previous production outages and like come up with rules that would prevent these kind of outages.
I've always wanted a tool that would let me understand the risk of any given pull request. Like how likely, based on everything we know up till now, how likely is it that that this pull request will be a problem? And so being able to decide, and that, obviously that could be just length and directory based. It doesn't have to be that smart, but like you said, you can start to pull in all of this incident data and other data from the past. That's really interesting and seems powerful. And maybe that's like the bigger point is that thinking about AI as like a hands-on keyboard assistant is definitely missing the actual engineering opportunities that exist with it. Yeah. That might be way more impactful than whether a single engineer is using Copilot or not.
Absolutely, and you can even use it to help you make better architectural decisions. Right? Like the most high-level developer job, you can actually do better using these tools for sure.
Yeah. Otto, thank you so much. Always a treat. Loved that we could actually record this one and share it with folks. So I will see you at a meeting sometime soon.
Thanks.